Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're taking a look today at the new iPhone 6s, and this is a tradition on the channel where I take a look at the new iPhone the day it comes out. I've done it now since the iPhone 5, so you can go back and see the progression of these videos, so you can see the progression of features over time. Now I'm going to say this at the outset here because I always cover it from the angle of whether or not you should upgrade from your prior phone, and typically the way these things tend to work is that if you have an iPhone 6 like my beat up one over here, unless your iPhone 6 looks like this, there's probably not a real compelling reason to go up to the 6S unless you need the latest and greatest features you're about to see, because really there's a lot of incremental upgrades here, although the processor speed is significantly faster and the camera is a little bit better and offers some additional features. So we're going to talk about some of the differences between the two phones, primarily looking at the new features that are unique to this one, so you can decide whether or not an upgrade is warranted at this point in time. But typically what happens is, and I say this every year, is that the developers tend to aim for the area of the marketplace where there are the most number of iPhones. In other words, the iPhone 5, 5S is pretty much where the curve is for most iPhone users at the moment. Maybe some are finally getting into the 6. So it takes time for these faster phones to work their way into the marketplace. So we may not see a lot of apps that take advantage of all of the features you're about to see here for at least another 6 months to a year. And at that point, you might be ready to make the jump from your iPhone 6 to the iPhone 7 perhaps. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this review. Now the phone is pretty much the same as you saw last year as far as its looks are concerned. This is the 6S model, which is the 4.7-inch screen, a 1334 by 750 display at 326 pixels per inch. So it's under maybe some of the HD displays we see on some of the flagship Android phones. But to my eyes, it still looks great, and you don't really notice a huge difference in overall display quality. It's a very sharp Retina quality display. There's also a larger one called the 6S Plus, 5.5 inches, 1920 by 1080, a slightly higher density display at 401 pixels per inch. But that one's a little bit bigger, and I kind of like the size of this phone, so that's why I am sticking with it. It is a little bit heavier than last year's model, which is really surprising because Apple typically tries to make things thinner and lighter. It's about the same thickness, but it's about a half an ounce heavier. It was really noticeable when I first picked it up because when you're using a phone every day for a year, you really notice those subtle differences. It feels pretty much the same in the hand, although it does feel like the glass is a little bit thicker, and again, it is a little bit heavier to hold, but that is not a problem for me at all. There is a pretty big bump on the processor side, so even just things like unlocking the phone are noticeably faster. So if I put the two next to each other here and do my TouchID press, you can see just how much faster the new phone unlocks. And again, that was something that I just kind of noticed as I was using it. And it wasn't something that is maybe all that apparent on video, but when you unlock your phone several times a day for a year, you really do notice those little subtle speed differences. Siri works a lot better now also because I can do this. Hey Siri, what's the weather like today?
Today, the temperature will range from 50.
And what's nice is that you can do the you know what Siri with the phone just on battery now. So in the past, you could do that on the iPhone 6 if it was plugged in. This new phone will recognize that trigger phrase even when it's not plugged in. It also does some training with your voice when you first get it going, so it will somewhat be able to try to discern you from someone else trying to trigger the phone's voice recognition. But if you are getting some false alarms on it, you might want to just disable it. Very similar to the Moto X in that regard, that there is some voice training at the outset to try to have it look for your voice versus somebody else's there. It has 2 gigabytes of RAM now. That's up from 1 gigabyte before. It's got a new camera on the back. It's now a 12 megapixel camera. It will shoot 4K video. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And that is up from 8 megapixels in the prior generation. They've also added some new Force Touch features to the display here too, which are pretty neat. So that is the thing we're going to look at first. Now I should correct myself because this is called 3D Touch and not Force Touch. On the Mac and on the watch they call it Force Touch. Here it is 3D Touch. But a very similar concept in that the screen can detect pressure. So not only where your finger is positioned, but how much pressure you're putting down on the screen. So if I push into an icon here, some apps are going to give me additional options or shortcuts to get to things that I may have to hunt around for normally inside the app. So a great one here is the App Store, where if you want to go redeem a gift certificate, it's often hard to find that. You don't have to really hunt around anymore. You can just tap on redeem in there and get in there. Other apps like my OmniFocus app here give me some options for jumping to portions of the app that I use frequently, which is very nice. So you have some nice options there. And it also does some things for general behavior too. So if I just slide the screen to the left here, as you can see, it pulls up my search. But if I force press, I get the multitasking operation here, so that is a pretty cool thing. It's also able to detect, of course, the pressure, so if you want to move icons around, you don't push down as hard, you just tap and hold like you did before, and it notices you're not pushing pressure down and puts up the little jiggly things so you can move the icons around and whatnot, so that is a pretty cool thing there. It also, in different modes, does different things. So if you have a keyboard up on the screen and you force press on the keyboard, you get a little trackpad option where you can move the cursor around on here too. So again, if we tap on a key, we will put a key press on there, but if I tap and hold, I will get a cursor position. I think it's also possible, I haven't figured out how it works just yet. It's very, there's a lot of things that you have to kind of just play with to learn, but you can also start selecting text. If you hover over a certain portion of the text, you can then drag it and maybe get a little bit more precision in getting that text selected. And there are other portions of the interface where you can start to see this 3D touch being useful, including here in the messaging app. So like it did on prior versions of the iPhone, it recognized that we're trying to set up a time to grab breakfast. And if I hold down this smart link here, it'll pull up my calendar and let me know if I have room in my calendar to have breakfast with. And if I let go of it, it'll just bring me right back to the message. But if I push down and then kind of scroll up here, I can go ahead and create the event right in my calendar too. So it adds some efficiency to the interface, and I really kind of like how this is working. So a very impressive little feature. It's going to be one of those things that I think I'm going to start trying to do on my iPad, which doesn't have this feature on there. So I think it's just like the fingerprint sensor. It's something you're going to start using and wish it was on your other devices. So that's pretty much the biggest change as far as interface is concerned on here. But now we're going to take a look at some of the incremental changes. That is the camera as well as the processing speed. Now the image quality on the new camera is better. It's not groundbreaking in the sense that it's like worlds better than the old phone, but the new 12 megapixel sensor, up from 8 on the old one, is able to pull out more detail than we could get before. So I'm really pleased with the image quality. I've always been pleased with the iPhone image quality, even going back to the 5 and the 5S, primarily because their interface is really nice. The camera is very easy to use. And it also does a lot of nice image processing automatically without having to play around with the image too much after the fact. Now, if you're a serious photographer, you may not like all those automatic features, but for most consumers, they want to pick up their phone, take a picture, and have it look nice. And more often than not, the iPhone gets it right for me. The Moto X, which we looked at just recently, has a really nice camera also. So there are other choices now with cameras that are competitive with this, if not a little bit better. But from my standpoint, I've really been quite pleased with not only how these pictures look, but also how nicely they can get taken with the iPhone interface. Now, the phone does now shoot 4K video, and you can see a sample running here. This is a 1080p video that you're watching right now, so I will put a link to the actual 4K footage in a playlist that will be linked above so you can check it out in its full resolution glory. But it looks good. It's a nice camera. The stabilizer is also very nice on it. It does better stabilization at 1080 than it does at 4K, and the reason is that the 6S does not have an optical stabilizer, so it's using a stabilizer just through software, kind of moving the image around to get the smoothest possible picture. And my little run through the grass there was actually a pretty bumpy ride because the ground is very uneven and I was walking very fast, but the camera actually does a pretty decent job of smoothing out even some really rough stuff, and that's consistent with what I saw on the 6 also. In fact, I used the iPhone 6 for a lot of the close-up shots you've seen here on this channel over the last couple of years. My only gripe with the video function is that you have to go and dig around to change modes, so it's not something you can just change while you're in the camera app itself. You have to go dig all the way down to the record video option here and set it to the frame rate and resolution that you'd like to shoot it at. It also does 1080p at 60 frames per second. There's also a slow motion mode like you had on the prior iPhone, the iPhone 6, that shoots at 240 frames per second at 720p. Another cool feature they added is something called a live photo. So we have a picture of my dog here. She's often hard to capture because she's always moving around. But now what it'll do is when you take a normal picture, it actually captures the first 3 seconds and the last 3 seconds, including the frame that you captured. So you get it's not quite a video, it's like a successive collection of still frames, but it also records audio at the same time. So you kind of get a nice little moment in time where you have the still image if you want it. So you could take this and make a print from it, but you also have the leading and trailing images that it also took because the camera is always active. What's kind of neat is that it does this little creepy thing to let you know that this is a live image as you're scrolling through your photo. So this one is not a live image, so you can see that one stays pretty still, but you can see her eyes kind of move there. So it gets a little creepy sometimes depending on what you were taking on there. My selfie here is also incredibly creepy. Now what's neat is they also, instead of putting a front-facing flash on here, they've put on a multicolor thing on the screen that lights up very bright. So you get a nice even image on a flash for a selfie camera. This is coming off the front camera. And you can see I did a live image with that also, so you can see that flash go off. You can almost see those different colors firing off there also to get that very nice balanced color on the selfie camera. So pretty cool stuff. Nice incremental changes on the camera, and I think it does keep them in line with what their competitors are offering on their phones. And one thing that did get a pretty significant boost on the new phone is its graphics capabilities. It is running a much faster GPU, a graphics processor, so you get very fast games like this AG drive running with really nice image quality on it. This game actually supports Force Touch too, so you can control your acceleration just by kind of letting up on the screen. So it's got some ability to detect force for that accelerator there, so that's pretty cool. But what really was interesting to me was when I ran some benchmarks, because sometimes when you're just using web browsers and stuff, you don't always see the huge performance increase that this phone does bring. So we get a 3D Mark benchmark score of 27,192 on this device. That puts it well ahead of the iPhone 6. As you can see, that's kind of down there at the bottom at 16,000. But it's also much higher than the two other flagship Android phones I've looked at recently, both the Moto X Pure and the LG G4. So it is a much, much faster phone, a much larger bump than you had between the 5S and the 6. So they've really done a lot on the graphical side of things here, even a little bit on the processor side too. So what you're seeing on the other columns here are the graphic frames per second benchmarks. So on the first graphics test that runs in that 3D Mark benchmark, you can download that too for free from the App Store to get a test on your own device. 225 frames per second, 149.1 on the second one, again, well beyond the other phones we've looked at. And the physics frame rate, which really measures its CPU capabilities, how well it can process data through its regular processor, not just the graphics processor, puts it around 39.3 frames per second, and that is on par with the other flagships out there. So a really nicely performing phone, a substantial increase in graphical performance over the prior generations. This is a larger bump than we've seen from one iPhone to the other in the past. So it is a pretty significant thing. The question is whether or not there will be a lot of software to take advantage of that, and that's one of the things that we may have to wait a little bit for. So I think we'll start seeing more in the next 3 to 8 months than we will right now. So if you're really not in a rush and you have an iPhone 6, I think you'll be pretty happy with that. A couple other loose ends here to tie up, because I know people will ask about battery life. The battery life on this is pretty much identical to what I had on my iPhone 6. I use these phones constantly throughout the day, so it was rare that I got through a full day with my iPhone 6. This is about the same level of battery life, because I'm always on it, always doing stuff, and that will suck the battery life out of it a little bit more. So I think you'll get through most of the day, but towards the end, you'll definitely want to plug it in, especially if you're a heavy user like I am. It's funny because when I got the 6, I started using this a lot more than some of my other devices because the screen was just the right size for me, and I think we're going to see pretty much the same battery life we saw out of the iPhone 6, which is not bad, but you definitely want to just have a charger around during the course of the day. Call quality, though, has improved through the speaker on board here. It sounds a lot cleaner than it did on my old phone, so that was a nice improvement. The speakerphone is a little bit better, too. So incremental improvements all around. I think it's a really decent phone. Their graphic performance on here is pretty stunning for a phone. It even exceeds the iPad Air 2 that came out last year. That was a pretty fast device in its own right. So we're seeing a lot of new technology getting smaller and smaller. It'll be interesting to see how the rest of the market responds, because I'm sure we'll be seeing more Android phones throughout the course of the month. So the bottom line is this. I think if your iPhone 6 is as beat up as mine is, you certainly can't go wrong by upgrading. But I think if you have a 6 and are happy with it, you're not going to see a lot of the benefits that the 6S provides for some time. And if you're not a big game player and not doing a lot of graphically intensive things on your phone, then you may never really see a big reason to upgrade right away. You may want to hold off. If you're on one of the older phones like the 5 and the 5S, or gosh, the 4, then this is a huge upgrade. It's going to feel like a whole new world when you go up from especially the iPhone 4 or 4S to this one. It is a much, much faster device. But you'll also get a very similar feeling from just going from one of those older phones to the 6, which is also a lot less expensive now. So I'm quite happy with it. It's a really nice phone, and it's really nice to see how competition is really making everyone better. We've seen just such tremendous performance over just the last 3 phones we've looked at here, or 4 phones we've looked at here in the channel over the last couple of weeks, both at the high end, but also at the low end too. So nice phone, but very expensive. So again, just keep that in mind. And this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching. And of course, leave me some comments down below if you'd like to see more detail on this device. We'll see you soon.